Hey, good afternoon. This is Colin. I'm one of the webinar presenters today. I just wanted to come on air and let you know that if you are here for the Mission Insight webinar, you are in the right spot. I know it's quiet. You may or you should be able to see my screen that has a Mission Insight logo on there. We're going to start at around 1 o'clock Eastern. We'll give some of the stragglers time to get in, but just wanted to let you know that you're in the right spot if you're here to learn a little bit about what Mission Insight can do for your church. So thank you for taking the time out of your day. I see somebody saying they're not seeing the screen. Austin, can you see the screen?
I can see the screen.
Give me a second. I'll stop my share. How's that now, Justin?
See.
Awesome.
Beautiful. All right.
So we got a couple people in here already. You can use the chat function, but where are y'all coming from today? Austin's coming from. Also, where are you coming from?
I'm coming from Phoenix, so it is beautiful. Let's see. It is currently 71 degrees with a high at 80. So, needless to say, tonight I will probably have to go spend some time outside. Colin, where are you joining us from?
We actually have you beat over here on the East Coast. So I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, right in the heart of the state, and it is 73 degrees right now, Austin. Beautiful sunny day.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about this webinar, but would love to be sitting outside as well under the sun.
You know, there was part of me that almost tried to do this outside, but I didn't want to risk the Wi-Fi. I see we've got someone from, let's see, we've got Bellevue, Washington. Love Bellevue. Have spent a lot of time in the Bellevue, Kirkland area. One of the most picturesque, beautiful suburban areas I have ever been to in my life. And downtown Bellevue is a good time. We've got someone from Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a good one.
I need my East Coast people to speak up. We're getting dominated out by West Coast.
I know. We've got
and Austin, while you're looking at those, just for everybody that's on here, I want you to know I don't normally sound like RFK. I've lost my voice over the past week and am trying to regain it. So I apologize that happened, but we'll just have to deal with it today.
Yes. No, absolutely. We've got someone from Albuquerque, New Mexico, another West Coaster, not too far from us. Let's see, Charlotte, North Carolina.
There we are.
Colin, you're not far from Charlotte.
No, Charlotte's only an hour drive. People say the best thing about Columbia is that it's a day's drive to anywhere.
Where's the furthest place you could get in a day, Colin?
I mean, like St. Louis is probably a 12-hour drive.
That's not horrible.
But then more importantly, Atlanta is 2.5 hours and Charlotte's 1 hour. So I've got two main airport hubs that I could get anywhere in the world.
I mean, you go to Atlanta, you can pretty much fly anywhere in the world. So I flew to Atlanta about a year ago, and it was one of the more interesting flying experiences I think I've ever had.
And really quick, for the folks that we had quite a few registrants, for the folks that are registered, that do not attend, if you are now watching this, you now already know you will get a recording of this. And to the folks that are on here, you will also get a recording of this yourself. So you get the benefit of being live, being able to ask some questions, but everyone should be getting a recording. And it's actually 1 Eastern now, but we're still going to. Austin, I don't know about your experience, but my experience with these is most of the people show up within 5 minutes of the after the actual start time.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. If I'm not hosting it for whatever reason, I always get that email notification right before, and then I jump on a few minutes after. So we can still give it a few more minutes. Um, I would love to know as well if any of y'all are any ACS Technologies ministry partners. Do we have any ministry partners here with us? You can just use the chat feature, let us know, hosts and panelists.
I
Oh,
know there were
beautiful.
some on the registration list, but I'm not
Yeah.
recognizing individuals' names here so far.
Hey, I know we have a few that are set to come. So ACS, we call our churches our ministry partners because we like to partner with churches. So we try to keep a pretty close relationship and get to know everyone. And so looks like we have a few joining in now. I'm seeing some of our ministry partners in here. So good to see all of you.
Justin, I thought I recognized your name. Do you mind me asking what church you're with? I saw it earlier, but I definitely recognized your name. Crossroad, yes.
Oh,
Sorry,
beautiful.
I said that on air. I probably shouldn't have, but no, Justin. Going back a decade ago, I used to work in our support group, and I remember working with you guys on some stuff.
Very good. All right, it looks like we have gotten a lot of people that joined here in the meeting. So, Colin, do we want to go ahead and get things kicked off? That
Yeah,
sound
I
good to
would say
you?
so.
All right,
Yeah, we had a lot of
let's
people
do it.
join. Let's go ahead.
Yeah. No, people will probably be trickling in over the next few minutes, but for everyone who is here, welcome. This is a time for us to dive into Mission Insight, but ultimately walk you through how you as a pastor, a church leader, maybe an outreach director, whatever your role might be, we want to come alongside you and help you look at how you can expand your reach into your community and ultimately reach your outreach goals as a church. And so we're going to dive into some common issues that different church leaders are running into around outreach and all of that. And we're going to dive into some practical ways that Mission Insight can help you navigate that and ultimately reach your community. And so before we do dive into all of that, just a few housekeeping reminders. Any questions that you have that come through, rather than putting those through the chat, actually throw those in. You should see a Q&A button there at the bottom of your screen. Throw them in the Q&A for any questions that come up while we're here today. We'll try to answer as we go, but just know as well, we are going to leave some time at the end for any and all questions that might be needed. Also want to throw in there that this webinar is going to be recorded, and so you're gonna after today ends, probably early next week, you'll receive a recording of this webinar to your email. And so if there's anything that you're like, oh, I can't remember that from today, you're gonna get a full copy sent to you here early next week. And so that being said, Colin, I'd love if you could kind of just, since you're the ACS Technologies OG, Colin's been here for a long time. Just if you could walk us through ACS Technologies, who we are, what we're about, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So ACS, for those of you that do not know, is our organization, and Mission Insight, what you guys are here to see today, is one of our programs. ACS has been around for 40 plus years. Don't ask me the specific year, the specific number, because I'll get it wrong, and this is being recorded. But we've been serving churches for a long time. We serve churches all the way from just a home church that's just now meeting. They're really small, all the way to serving churches that have thousands. I would even say there's some of our ministry partners have tens of thousands of attendees on any given Sunday. And we help all these different churches in just different facets, really just to help make your ministry flow smoother, be more effective operationally, whether that's church management software, custom apps, e-giving,
Yeah.
accounting, IT, or like what we're talking about today in MissionInsite.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, as an organization, we were talking about this a little bit before. We kicked things off, but we call the churches that we work with our ministry partners. So we really do want to come alongside you, serve you, help you serve your church to the best of your ability, and also resource you in that so that you have the best technology and the best information to be able to do that. And so I do want to give just a quick introduction for myself. My name is Austin. I have the privilege of coming alongside a lot of our ministry partners here at ACS. For me, I work with a lot of our larger churches and denominations on the West Coast. And so, again, as a background, I had been a pastor and leader for a long time in the church. My heart is for the church and to serve the church to really be all that God's called it to be. And so I've been here at ACS now for a little while, working alongside our West Coast churches, and so that's a little bit about me. Before we do dive into things, Colin, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you that are on the West, I would encourage you talk with Austin, hear his story. He's worked at a lot of churches that you will know. Has a lot of experience, so he's an invaluable resource. But I'm Colin, as you can see on the screen. I've been at ACS for about 8 years, just coming up on a decade. I do not normally sound like I sound right now. I apologize. I was sick and I've lost my voice, and it's finally coming back. But I oversee our large churches really east of the Mississippi. So any church that averages 800 to 1,000 in average Sunday attendance or more, they all come through me. I also work with several of our mainline denominations, especially the denominations that are predominant here in the Southeast, like Southern Baptist, AME Zion, United Methodist, Global Methodist. I work with a lot of these organizations around MissionInsite, around understanding data, and have for probably the past 6 years now. So
Yeah.
we're super thankful that you guys are here and have carved a little bit of time out of your day. It will be worth your time.
Yes. And so, to Colin's point, he had talked a bit about ACS, and today we're really going to focus on Mission Insight. Mission Insight is really a tool to give you a lot of data to help you leverage your ministry to be as effective as possible. And when talking about Mission Insight, I always like to give this preface at the beginning, because we're going to be going through a ton of data. We're going to be going through a lot of information. And I just always like to give this preface to say that data by no means is intended to replace the Holy Spirit, but it's really something that can come alongside you as a church, again, empowered by the Holy Spirit, and ultimately help you make informed decisions as a church, to really make sure that it's based on data and research so that you can be effective and efficient. But when you get into the data, it can be very easy to go down a rabbit hole with information. And so I always like to give this preface that it's so important to, again, integrate the Spirit's leading for your church, for you as a ministry, and then take that and let this data support that rather than be something that replaces that, if that makes sense. So I do always like to give that preface before diving too deep into things with MissionInsite.
Yeah, so we have a saying here, and I promise we're going to be sharing our screen in just a moment, but there's a lot here that we just need to build up to. But we have this saying that effective ministry opportunities come from knowing who we are and knowing who our neighbors are. And when we understand that, we can contextualize it and have effective ministries. So we do want this to be as interactive as possible through a virtual webinar where you guys can't see each other typing and all this good stuff. But I want to pose the question to you guys, even if you just want to sit there and think about it to yourself, you don't have to respond. But when we say, who are we? If I'm a church wanting to know who are we, what are the things that come to your mind when we pose that question?
Yeah. And you can throw these in that Q&A box as well. All right, let's see. Colin, something I think that a lot of churches, when they say, "Who are we?" ultimately they want to know, like, who are we reaching? Who's a part of our church? And I mean, I think a very simple first one that we hear is age. Age is a big one. See, it looks like someone sent in demographic. So again, pretty similar to age, but can encompass a lot more.
Yeah, and honestly, as you guys are thinking about this, it can be some super spiritual, complex answer. The
Yeah.
ones that typically get brought to our attention, or the things that we look at, or things that it can mean, really, is it can be something as simple as what Austin just mentioned. It can be age. It can be the ethnic backgrounds of who we are. It can be the socioeconomic status of us as a church. It can be, what motivates people to come to our church. Is it based off of where they live? Are they attracted to the teaching style that we have? Are they attracted to something else in the church? Another identifying factor of who are we, it could be theological beliefs. I mean, that's what
Mhm.
denominations are all about, in a way. So there are different things that can happen to make up who we are. And I'll give you one quick story, and then I'm going to share my screen. I started attending a church a couple years ago. I moved to a new city, and we started attending this church. They had solid leadership, solid teaching, yet we noticed we weren't growing. So we didn't understand why. So we peeled back that layer of the onion to understand who we were. And what we found out was our church, we averaged about 300 people on any given Sunday. So it was a little smaller in comparison to a lot of you. We averaged about 300 people. Our average age was mid 50s. Our average ethnic background was like 85 to 90% white Caucasian. But then when we started to look at the community around us, the two fastest growing demographics were Hispanic, Latino, and African American. And the average age of people moving into the area was under 35 years old. So were we not speaking the language that we needed to speak? Were we doing the things to catch the eye of other people? Those are things that we can start to evaluate as we're figuring
Yeah.
out why are we stuck where we're stuck. So we just talked about a couple things that you can think about when it comes to identifying who we are. You don't have to use a program like MissionInsite to identify all of that. Some of this
Yeah.
can be done in your church management system. Every single one of you has a church management system. You can look at ages. You could probably look at receipts to know who are the people that are giving, and you could probably categorize and understand, are we a wealthy church? Are we not a wealthy church? There are data points that you can already gather. But going into MissionInsite, we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to do something called a plotting. You guys can take from your church management system a list of all of your members, or if you're a multi-campus church, you can take different campuses and take them into this program and plot them on a map. And so that's what you're seeing me do right now. So every single one of these blue dots is a member of this church. Now, these blue dots don't really tell us much, just being thrown on the screen. However, we can start to gather data now that we've got our people in here. One of the first things that I always tell people to do is understand where your people are in relation to your church. So we're looking at our church here. We got all these blue dots. I'm going to come in, I'm going to draw a shape. Now, Austin and everyone else here, we do a survey every 4 years called the American Belief Survey. And we ask people, one of the questions is, how far would you like to drive to a place of worship? 60 to 70% of those people responded less than a 15-minute drive. So what you just saw me do was overlay on this map what a 15-minute drive would look like. Anything within this red shade is within that 15-minute drive. And then what percentage of our people is encapsulated in this 15-minute drive. So we can start to figure out, some of these people may come to us based off of location alone. Some of these people, it may be something else. It could be a theological alignment. It could be something we do. But that's where we're going to start here in Mission Insight. And then we're going to take this information and we're going to run a report. And we're going to run a report called a comparative insight. And I've already got it loaded up here. And this comparative insight, it's taking all the information so far that we've talked about and putting it in here. And Austin, I'm going to hand it to you in just a second. But I want to explain what people should be looking at here. On the left-hand side are these different components of demographics like we talked about: ages, ethnicities, household types, socioeconomic backgrounds. These are the different demographic points. But there's a particular section around understanding who we are as a church. And Austin, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, no, I love diving into this information because it really does give you valuable insight into, again, looking at inward before we look outward, the four walls of our church. Who do we have? What are we currently, I guess, attracting as far as personality, demographic, all of that? Immediately you can look at this count where it says count weighted there on the right. You're going to see at the bottom, there are a total number, and this is looking at families right here and just individuals in the church, but you're going to see there are 1,062 people part of this church in the adult age group. And so of that 1,062, even just looking on a practical level of the age, what does the age demographic look like? What does that breakdown look like? You're going to start to see some, again, full breakdown of the data, again, bringing it in from your church management system and having the data right there in front of you. And so, for example, when you look at this church, 1,062 attendees, 265 of them are between the ages of 51 and 65. That's over 25% of 1,062. And then when you start to look at, 66 to 75 and 76 and up, really, you're going to say that the bulk majority of this church and the people who are attending this church are within that 51 and up age group. So it tells us that we're doing a really good job as a church of reaching that younger generation. The older generation. And again, you'll see, there are only 39 attendees within that 19 to 24. So that's, of that 1,000 people, that's going to make up a relatively small percentage of the people who are attending of the church. And again, you can look into all of the different, we just looked into age right there, but the same is true of, household types, single parent with kids. You can see that there are 32 single parent with kids. And even looking at the presence of a child in the household and in the church. And so, I guess, Colin, I'd love to hear anything that might stand out to you specifically as it relates to, some of these insights that we're looking into.
Yeah, just going back to the list that we went through at the beginning around when we ask ourselves, who are we? What are the different things that we can use to look at when we ask ourselves that question? So age is obviously one. Household types is one that Austin just mentioned, but also even scrolling down, the economics of our church. Are we a rich church? For lack of a better term, are we a church that's struggling financially, or it's a concern of ours? Are we a diverse church? So understanding the different ethnicities that are a part of us. So once again, following what Austin told us, if we look at this column here called count weighted, those are the number of households that are part of our church that fit that demographic category. So this is how we can really start to understand who we are. Because once again, if we think back to our equation, and I'm not here to say our equation is foolproof and it is law, but if we understand who we are, and then the second part is coming up, we understand who our neighbors are, that's where we can really be even more effective in our ministry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
no, definitely.
With that being said, Austin, if we look at the equation, like I just mentioned, understanding who we are, and I'll scroll through this just a second and let you guys just see there's a lot of different things here. We're only touching on a couple of them, but we ask ourselves the question of who are we, and then we turn around and we ask the question of who is our neighbor. This is something that you cannot do inside of your church management system because you don't have the data on them. And so
Yeah.
we can ask ourselves the same types of questions around, you know, who are our neighbors' age, or what are their
Yeah.
ages? Who are our neighbors from an ethnic background? So also, I'd like for you to speak just a moment, just around the importance of knowing our neighbor. I think some of us assume, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things that, obviously sometimes churches will be a reflection of their communities and sometimes it won't be. And again, this is probably the pastoral side of me. Every church is different. Every church has a different calling for who they're called to reach. I was raised in one of the churches I was raised in, at least, was very much an inner city church. And so the types of people that I interacted with were different than the people that I interacted with at the suburban church that I also went to later in life. So every church reaches different people, but at the end of the day, we really want to get a sense of who's around us because that's where we're going to start to see ministry opportunities. And so again, it's really important. And so that being said, looking at this data and looking at this chart, we just looked at all right, kind of some breakdowns. Looking at that on the far right, the comp index, the comparable index, it's going to give us a sense of how are we doing as a church compared to our community. And so the baseline number on the comparable index is going to be 100. And so the closer you are to 100, the more in line you are with your community. So, a perfect example would be, looking at this 98 number. Their percentage of people between the ages of 51 and 65 would be very reflective of the community. But again, the further you get away from 100, the less reflective you are from the community up or down. So again, you'll see on, kind of above that age, you're going to see that the church is a much larger reflection of the community with, 66 to 76 and up. You'll see that 161 or 148. That's going to be weighted pretty significantly above the community averages. And again, this works both ways. So on the contrary, you'll see here that the church's ability to reach people, I'd say 36 and under is going to be pretty much a lot lower than what you would see in the community. And so this comparable index really allows us to start to see, okay, where are we missing the mark? And ultimately, who are the people we can reach? Something that really stands out to me as well, Colin, and I'd love to hear maybe just a few that stand out to you, is the single parent with kids. It's a 37, whereas 100 is our baseline. It went all the way down to 37. So immediately when looking at the household type, seeing that there's a huge gap between single parents who have kids, we're seeing here that they're not really plugged into the church, but they are a big part of the community. That one really sticks out initially. Colin, talk to me. What are some things you've noticed as well?
Yeah, I also want to just give some added context because there's a lot of numbers here on the screen. And so what that comparative index is doing is it's really looking at your church as its own little community, and it's giving a percentage of that demographic to your church. So a prime
Yeah,
example of that is what Austin was talking about. This 51 to 65 years old, uh, they are a almost direct reflection of their community. And what that means is, of their 1,062 families, the head of household is between that age range 24.9% of the time. And in the community, we have 56,000 families, and the head of household age between 51 and 65 is 25%. So it's
yeah,
looking at your church as really a smaller pool here and doing an overlay comparison. Yeah, so you brought out the age, the single parent with kids. I mean, one that is very obvious out there that a lot of people's minds go to is our diversity. How are we doing from an ethnic standpoint of who are the people that are in our seats? And you'll notice right here that there are 1,739 families in this church out of 2,220 that are white Caucasian. We've got 167 folks in our church that are African American, which is 7.5% of our congregation. Yet African American is 21.7% of the community at large. So it's
Yeah.
just letting us know that we are not necessarily a mirror to the community. And I do want to say something here really quick. We're not telling you that you need to be an exact reflection or a mirror of your community. Um, every church has its own purpose. For
Yeah.
example, my church has a Vietnamese church plant that meets at a campus right near us. If we were to run this study on our Vietnamese church plant, they are going to be astronomically weighted towards Vietnamese ethnic backgrounds. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's their purpose. But this at least gives you the insight, when you're starting to figure out strategy as a church and figure out the things that you're wanting to know. One other thing here that I like to speak on is just because we are not a mirror on a certain segment of a community, it doesn't mean we're suggesting you change your theology or your teaching to exactly meet a specific group, whether it's a low income group or a high income group. You know, but we can use the data to tailor some communications and tailor the things that we
Yeah.
do. I always like to think of the Gospels. Alston and everyone on here, we've got 4 accounts of Jesus's life written: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all somewhat say the same thing. Yet when you look at who wrote the individual Gospels, they wrote them for different purposes. When you look at Matthew was writing to a Jewish population, folks that knew the Old Testament. So he is very heavy in fulfilling Old Testament law and prophecies. And speaking of the lineage of Jesus, like he wrote that for a
Yeah.
purpose because he could speak to a group of people based off of what he knew about them. Um,
Yeah.
so that's how we can start to take this data and understand where we would identify some of our gaps are, and then we can
Yeah.
leverage the data to reach them.
And Colin, something that I would love to do is almost walk through, okay, based on this data, how can we create a missional opportunity? Not to jump the gun too much, but even just looking at this data, something that sticks out to me is, there's significant red within, the 2 lowest income pieces. And essentially what that shows is that, 22% of the area is making an income of $25,000 or less, um, which already shows significant financial hardship. And so, what I guess I would love to do is, if we could kind of walk through, how can we take some of this and outwork it within Mission Insight, but then also find, meaningful ministry opportunities within these people that we're trying to reach.
Yeah, it's a great point, Alston. So that leans into one other thing that I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but I want you guys to know about it. And that is going back to that American Belief survey that I've mentioned that we do, where we ask people where they would drive, how far they would drive. There are other questions we ask, and in Mission Insight, you can come in and run what's called like a Ministry Insight Priorities report. And I'd be willing to bet, Alston, not just because I ran the report already, but because of looking at the data like you, that finances is something that is of importance. So when I run that Ministry Insight Priorities to understand what these people care about, exactly what you said, Austin.
Yeah.
Very strong concern for financing the future. Very strong concern for day-to-day financial matters. There's also one in here for
Yeah.
caring for aging parents, which is not only an emotional concern, but also a financial concern. So
Yeah.
we've identified so far, Austin, to recap our equation, we've identified who we are in some
Yeah.
areas. We've identified who our neighbors are, the things that they care about, the thing that drive them, the understanding of the community. How do we contextualize is what you're asking, and use a program like Mission Insight to create effective missional opportunities.
Yeah.
So with that being said, Austin, what's the first thing you think of when it comes to churches and helping people with finances?
Yeah, I mean, and again, you look at that insight that shows, what are people in your area stressing about? What is top of mind for them? And finances was such a big one that immediately, you look at, okay, we have 22% of our greater community, even outside of the 4 walls of our church, make an income of $25,000 or less a year. They're struggling, their fear, it's really, consuming a lot of who they are. I think something like Financial Peace University or even maybe not Financial Peace University, but starting some groups or some workshops around financial planners in your area or who are maybe part of your church to help come alongside the community and teach them valuable resources. And so, Colin, what I actually want to do to make this as practical as possible is let's just create a scenario and say, okay, we've gone into MissionInsite. As a church, we've determined that there are a lot of people in our community who are struggling financially. And how can we reach the community? How can we reach the people around us using MissionInsite to ultimately, give them this resource, to ultimately give them this option? And again, it doesn't have to be Financial Peace University. It can be, again, whatever the needs are specific to your community. But again, taking this example, Colin, walk us through, how you would go about that and what that would look like for you.
Yeah, I'm going to show you two examples really quick, Austin.
Yeah.
I think it's important to know that we know it's a concern of finances of the general population of our area, but the question then comes, where do these people actually live?
Yeah.
So I'm going to hide this shade of red so our map is a little more clear. And I'm going to go to this section in MissionInsite called plotting. This is where we went earlier to plot our church members. Well, there's also a function of MissionInsite called Neighbor Center that allows you to look at households at a household level and say, show me the households that fit this criteria. So I can come in and start Neighbor Center, and you'll see there's several different filtering options here. And since we're talking about income, I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to select all, I want to see all households that make below the American average of household income.
Yeah.
So I've said that's my filter. Now I want to plot. And what you guys are about to see is you're going to see a lot of red dots start to pop up on the map. Those are the individual households that fit the criteria of your search. And these are people that are not a part of your church. So what I would do, Austin, if you're asking me practically, we've identified like this is a concern of our area. This is a way we can reach people. What I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the blue dots on the map to the red dots on the map, because the blue dots are people in our church that may or may not fit the criteria. And the red dots are people in our community that fit that criteria. So right here where my cursor is, there's a cluster of blue dots. So this is a neighborhood, or two neighborhoods actually, that if I were to sit here and count these blue dots, we probably have 30 or more church members that live in this neighborhood. And if you see all of the red dots here, all these red dots are the people that make below the American average of the household income, the median income for a household. And so I can then take this information and I can actually, not to spend too much time on this, but I can come in here and I can draw a shape around these neighborhoods. And I'm doing a rough shape here. You guys could get a little more granular with it. And when I draw that shape, I can then use MissionInsite to say, I would like for you to spit out the list of our church members that live in this area so that I can begin to contact them and say, we're going to offer this as a service to our community. Would you be interested in promoting it in your neighborhood? Would you be interested in hosting this in your home? Those are the types of things I'm going to ask of my existing church members based off of where they live in relation to the data point. There's one other thing, Austin, that I'd like to point out, and that is going back to this comparative insight. You asked me earlier what stood out, and you covered it. It's the single parents with kids. I mean, that is such a marginalized group that I've got a 1.5-year-old myself. I make comments all the time. I could not imagine doing this alone. So what an opportunity for us as a church to step in and minister to these folks. So once again, the question comes in, how do we know where these people are? You may generally know, but we could do the same type of plotting that we just did. And we could do something like children in the household is equal to present. And we could do marital status is equal to single. And that's going to overlay the red dots there. And then if we wanted to do a mailer out to these people because we're going to do a special Mother's Day or a Father's Day, or we want to do a Mother's Morning out, we can actually use MissionInsite to purchase address lists based off of that criteria. And so I could come in and say, I want to purchase an address list of this zip code of people that are single in their marital status but have kids in their household. That's where this tool really becomes effective in affecting ministry.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, like we said in the beginning, MissionInsite, it's very easy when you're working with data to go down the rabbit hole. And depending on the location, depending on the demographic, and honestly, depending on the community that your church is called to reach, this is going to look different for every single one of you. And the more you dive into the data, the more you dive into MissionInsite, those opportunities really do come available. And so this is just meant to be an example, but at the same time as well, a really practical showing of, hey, this is an easy win that we can have to ultimately reach our community. And so, for us, that's our heart. That's why we're here. That's what we want to do. But at the end of the day, we believe strongly that the local church is called to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And that when we look deeply at who we are and who we're trying to serve, the missional opportunities are going to be endless. And this is really a tool to help fuel those. And so that being said, I know we just walked through a lot of data, a lot of information. What I would like to do, again, feel free to use the Q&A. I want to make sure we use a few minutes, designate a few minutes here to walk through any questions that you might have. So what I'll ask is, again, use the Q&A button. What questions do you guys have about MissionInsite, the data? Something, while you guys are typing, Colin, I talked to a lot of churches, a lot of denominations about MissionInsite. One of the most common questions that I get is, I guess, how do you know? Like, where do you get this? Where do you get this information, this data? How does that work? And ultimately, how fresh is this data as well?
Yeah. Actually, somebody just asked the question around how fresh is the data? Does the data capture moves over time? That's a great question. So there's a couple different data sources here in play. One of them is U.S. Census data, right? So we pull in U.S. Census data. We also have another organization, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's called Synergos. Synergos is a predictive analytics firm. So like if we're looking at population and population estimates of a certain area within our geographic region or our mission field, the U.S. Census data is going to tell us based on 2020 what the population was. Synergos has built this data model to do predictions of what populations will be based off of trends. Believe it or not, they estimated the 2020 census information. I can't remember. There's like 350 million Americans or something like that. And they did a prediction on what the population would be. And for some reason, I think it was somewhere around, they were like 30 to 40,000 off of the total out of 350 million. So that's another data source we use. Another data source is Experian. And Experian, they provide like some of that socioeconomic data. All that to say, because the question was, how fresh is the data? The U.S. Census information we obviously get every 4 years, or I'm sorry, every 10 years. The American Belief Survey that we talked about with top priorities, we do that survey every 4 years, and we just wrapped up our most recent survey. So that will then be laid into the platform at some point here in the future.
Yeah.
And then the predictive analytics, that updates every 6 months. We do our best with all the different moving parts and pieces when it comes to people moving, trends analysis, but that's about the cadence.
Yeah. And I mean, even with that survey that we just wrapped up, if, again, we don't have the slide up right now, but when we were, on the call earlier, we were looking at, ultimately what are the concerns of the community? And that's where we drew that, financial concerns was, among the top. You would have noticed that it said COVID-19, political and social unrest, because 2020 was obviously a pretty transformative year in a lot of different ways. And so it's going to be interesting as well, just as someone who loves to look at the data. I'm excited to see, how that's going to how things have changed over the last 4 years or 5 years now, and really what's going to be top of mind for everyone.
And
Great
just so
question.
for everyone that's wondering, like, what are the different ways this can be used? I've got a lot of experience here in working with individual churches, but also organizations. I mean, this can be used from church revitalization to just everyday ministry. Like we want to be informed in some of our decisions, all the way to church planting, campus planning,
Yeah.
understanding the reach of a particular campus, where we start to lose opportunity at. If we plant a campus here, do we start to overlap that 10-minute drive or 15-minute drive? There's a lot of things that this could be used for as it
Yeah.
relates.
Absolutely. And it looks like we have another question, another few questions. Um, who is the audience for the American Belief Survey? Who are the people polled and how are they selected?
That is a great, great question. So we contract that out with a polling firm. Give me just a second. It sounds like you will probably enjoy seeing this. Give me just a second. We actually have an entire. I'm just going to post this in the chat if that's okay. But we have an entire methodology posted. I'm going to send that out to everyone, even though only one of you asked the question. That is to our help center for MissionInsite. And we've got a PDF posted about the methodology in which it takes place. How do we do the weighting of respondees? Essentially, what happens is there's about 15,000 people across the U.S. that get polled. But or not get polled, but respondents, should I say. And what we do is we categorize them into geographic regions. We categorize them into Experian Mosaic statuses, which are, we don't have enough time to talk about Experian Mosaic statuses, which are also in MissionInsite. But basically, it's a predictive way to understand how someone in a particular geographic region of a particular demographic, socioeconomic background may think about something. So while we may not be looking at the exact person in the neighborhood when we run that report that says what's a concern, but what we can do is we can aggregate the data from people that fit that person's profile in that geographic region, and we can create a weighted sense of that. If you
Yeah.
want to click that link, it gets super detailed.
Yeah. I mean, that Experian mosaics kind of groupings, it's what determines the ads that you get from different companies. And, ultimately it's kind of the leading predictive behavior, insight out there. And so it's super helpful to have part of this as well, because it ultimately, again, allows if corporations and the largest businesses in the world are utilizing this data to try to sell you things, we believe that, hey, we have the greatest message in the history of the world, and so this is something that we can use to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Any other questions before we let you all go? Here we go.
Also, while you're reading that question, I'm going to share my screen. For
Yeah.
those of you that do need to hop out, I can't remember what our time frame was for this. I do want to at least give you the opportunity to write down our number. Odds are you're probably going to come to me or Austin if you call that number.
Yeah.
But that is our general line. If you want to write that down, if you want to speak further about it, you're more than welcome to give us a call. That's for those of you that need to hop out. If you need to ask a question later, you're welcome to call that number.
Yeah.
Just wanted to provide that out to you guys.
Yeah. So the final question here is: does MissionInsite data contain identifiable names, current occupant by address, or is it anonymous?
It is not anonymous. Now you can restrict who has rights. So I mean that's a very interesting question. And Justin, I'm glad you asked the question. I promise you, Justin, there are more people in here. They're just all being more shy than you. But it's a great question because the reports that we just showed were very generalized. However, that neighbor center portion, it is at a per household level. And those red dots that you saw on the screen you can go and click on that red dot. It'll tell you the person's name. It'll tell you what Experian Mosaic code or Mosaic segment they are a part of. It'll tell you their language spoken at the house. It'll give you their address. That's how we get the mailing addresses. But that is a feature that you would probably retain for yourself, where you may give other people rights to run reports. You may not want everybody to have that because our goal is, let's leverage this data for the gospel. And some of it can feel invasive. But as Austin just said, secular companies are doing the same thing. We would just want to leverage it for the gospel.
Yeah.
Did that answer that question? Well, I feel like I answered it, but I want to make sure.
Are there export features or an API to access the data?
It's a good question. Once again, so no on the API right now. There's been conversations because we would like to, this is our product. We offer other products too, like church management systems. We have talked around the idea of, how could we bring this data into a CHMS through an API or something like that. But I can speak confidently and say that there's not an API access to this at the moment. There is a way to do some exporting of data.
Yeah.
So I ran some of the predefined reports. You can create your own custom reports that you can export out to a CSV file.
Yeah, and like we showed as well, you have the ability to purchase an address list. So again, if you want to promote, a single Mother's Day event, you could purchase the address list in the area that you found has the highest concentration of single mothers, or you want to promote financial peace to the area that you found has a high concentration of people, both in your church and also below the poverty line. Those are addresses that you can also purchase within MissionInsite as well. Perfect. Well, if any of y'all have any other questions, we would love to talk more with you. We put our number up there. Feel free to reach out to us. Again, at the beginning of next week, we are going to send out this recording so that if there's anything you want to recap on or that we might have missed, we can always make sure that you get that information. We did have one more question come through, so we'll answer that and then we'll close things out here. But I guess the final question is: can we extend attributes in the MissionInsite model or customize in any way? So creating things like custom grouping.
That's a good question again. So yes, I would be interested to know, what are some of the attributes and things that you would want to do. So I don't normally do this. I'm going to break my cardinal rule here, Austin. I'm going to go back and share my screen. This is a dangerous road to take. But
while you're doing this, I will say, we do have different churches and even some denominations that work with this for their churches that do want to see that different information on a campus by campus level. So especially with churches that have multiple campuses, this can be outworked in so many different ways, just given that you're not working with just one campus. You need to break it down on a campus by campus level.
Yeah. So some of those attributes, like if you're tracking those attributes in your church management system, you can choose to export some of those attributes out into MissionInsite. So whereas earlier I went ahead and just said, give me all people, I can choose to do some of a plotting. And this is just based off of different data points that we're tracking in our church management system, like member status, certain ages. I can also choose to create a legend so that these dots can become different colors. So there are different ways to create attributes. And then around the shapes that we talked about earlier, you'll see there's a section here called Saved Shapes. I can come in, I can create boundaries, I can create custom neighborhoods that we want to do. I can save those shapes and basically just choose those at any time. So you can do some like groupings and things like that with shapes and custom plotting.
Yeah. Perfect.
We still have most of our attendees here, but we got nobody asking questions.
All good. All good. If you do have any questions that come up, or maybe you don't want to ask it in the webinar, feel free to reach out to us directly. We'd love to talk with you, and again, just walk through this with you. But I appreciate all of you taking the time to come and spend some time with us. We are so for you guys and all that you're doing, and just appreciate how you're all serving the church. And so, Colin, what I would like to do is, could you pray us out before we go today?
Yeah, let me take out my cough drop. Yeah,
no worries.
Let's pray, everyone. God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the jobs that we have, and that we get to serve your kingdom and effectively reach more people in your name. God, thank you for our company and other companies that are here to serve the church. We pray for your blessing amongst our organizations, our churches that we're going back to. I pray that as we go throughout our day, that we are a reflection of you, and that our single goal is to go and make disciples. God, thank you for everyone here today. Help us to go about our personal lives, out with our friends, our social lives, and we just reflect who you are. Thank you for all the blessings that you've given us. And it is in your son's precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And just because it came in during the prayer, if any of you, as a question, if any of you want to walk through this more, our team would love to walk you through this and do a demo with you. So again, thank you everyone for coming, and we look forward to helping you however we can.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.